I'm Marty Matlock. Todd asked me, I've met most of you folks, Todd asked me to talk to you a little bit about what we're going to have this workshop tomorrow on for the National Roundtable for Sustainable Aquaculture. In the back you have Alan Stokes with the National Pork Board, and I would acknowledge that Alan and I worked together with a group of others with the National Pork Board to develop many of the tools and the thinking and the framing that I'm going to talk to you about today and that we're going to implement tomorrow and the next day. This has been an ongoing dialogue with agricultural producers from the animal sector largely, but also, and I'll talk to you a little bit about field and market today, from the crop production sector today. Ultimately, what we're facing is an incredibly rapidly changing dynamic environment for which we have to engage in profitable production of animals for human consumption or other purposes. And the fact is, it's awfully hard to maintain profitability when you have such dramatically changing environments. We heard this morning about legal and environmental interface and how the changing wildlife issues with invasive species, the smelt, politicize or opine on that a little bit. That should have just been treated as an invasive species. But how that completely altered the production landscape and is continuing to alter the production landscape in California in the face of climate change. So we have this that dramatic shifting sand under our producers' feet. We have other regulatory issues that our producers having to deal with animal welfare, legal challenges with animal welfare, and then we also have technology emerging, which is going to dramatically alter the way our producers understand their issues. And the simple issue of data, who owns data, is something that is unresolved in agriculture. It's generally presumed that the agricultural producer owns the data, but I would suggest to you that I can take my little drone that I got for Christmas and fly it over somebody's field and collect all the data I want, as long as it doesn't get shot down. In Arkansas, we use those for duck hunting practice, by the way. As long as it doesn't get shot down, I've got data, right? Do I own those data? Do I have the right to use remote sensing on somebody else's property? The answer is generally yes. And so those are some challenges we face. So the science of continuous improvement also is about the science of data and understanding data. And I always start off my presentations with reminding everyone that everything is connected. Ecological, social, and economic domains do not exist in isolation. There is no social domain without an ecological domain. There is no economic domain without a social domain. This is particularly poignant to see when you understand when an ecosystem fails. There's a major drought, and California is in an economic drought. Wait till there's an ecological drought. Then you're going to have mass migration. Many of my ancestors from the 1920s and 30s moved to California because of an ecological disaster in Oklahoma, a drought in the Great Plains. I suspect they'll be coming back. Social domains don't function without an ecological domain. Economic domains don't function without a social domain. You don't believe that? Look at any war zone. When the social domain breaks down, the economic system doesn't function. So all of these things are so interconnected, and we always know that, but we always act like they're not because we operate each of them independent of the other, we think. And we also are faced with the fact that everything is changing so fast we don't understand it. Part of the change is driven from the fact that there are going to be more of us. We're a very successful species. It's a wonderful thing. But we're all in this together. And many of our agricultural producers struggle with understanding the implications of this change. The two elements of that, the population dynamics are increasing and that we're all in this together. It's important to have a large scale, large picture context to make good business strategy decisions. I think aquaculture, the reason I like working with this sector and the reason I've engaged with Todd and with NIAA with developing the roundtable is because I see it as one of the most rapidly expanding animal production systems in the United States. It's already expanded in Asia pretty dramatically, but in the U.S. it's really going to expand dramatically. Reminding you that everything is connected, that the way that the constituents of well-being are connected to the land, to the ecosystem, or really through ecosystem services, through the things we take from the landscape or that we use the landscape for. that's particularly poignant when we start thinking about where we live and where more of us will live tomorrow. Where we live now, we have 34 million Californians, is that right? 38 million Californians. There are roughly 320 million Americans, United States citizens. 38 million of them live in one state. And actually, most of those live below San Francisco. You said 2/3 of those live below San Francisco. So that's a pretty densely populated area, and we have other pockets of dense populations. They ain't nothing compared to what's coming. Think about that density throughout a continent like Asia, throughout a region of a continent like Central Africa. So we're going to see that most of our expansion in our population is going to come from other places. Now, when I talk to retailers, I make it clear that and when I talk to business students, that if you're in the business of packaging and selling things, consumer packaged goods business, or if you're producing things for consumption, your customers, and if your business model, capitalism model that we all enjoy, creation of our prosperity is based upon that. If your future prosperity is based upon increasing sales, and that's really based upon increasing consumption, which is really based upon expanding population, your customers aren't going to come from around here in the next 40 years. They're coming from somewhere else. And I would say that the aquaculture industry too. We don't export many aquaculture products in this country. We consume almost everything we produce. We have the opposite problem. We have an expanding opportunity for national consumption, for domestic consumption of aquaculture products. But I would suggest that we have an expanding opportunity for export too. Alan, I'll put you on the spot just a little bit. What's the export market for pigs looking like these days for pork in the U.S.? Do we export much?
Well, it's been strong, but it's tied into the economics. It's plateaued and maybe declining just a little bit due to the strong dollar.
Strong dollar.
And a little port issue on the West Coast.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, your labor unions in L.A. shut down commerce in most of the country.
It's not me.
We're going to put a big sign, California.
I know. I'm getting used to this routine.
Right. You come to the Midwest, that's what you get.
It's the same. We're seeing the same thing. The ports issue is really, citrus guys have taken a huge hit. We're losing a lot of product just sitting now.
And if you don't understand how you're connected to those things, you can't make strategic decisions, and it can hurt your sustainability because it hurts your profitability. So that's why understanding these larger impacts is important. But the difficulty with this is everything is changing. And it's changing fast. And it's really hard to keep track of all this. So what we're arguing for is a framework that we all need to understand to keep track of these changes better, to put them in some context so that we can manage our own affairs in a way that respond to these changes more effectively. And that's at the enterprise level, the production company, the service provider, the agency level, all the way up to the sector level, collaboratively. The Great Acceleration, that's the folks in the anthropology realm are calling the era we're living in now. They call this also the Anthropocene, which many anthropologists really hate. They really just prefer to call this era the Holocene, the human-dominated era. But there was an article in Science Magazine that said the Anthropocene probably started about 1610, the beginning of the Industrial Revolution, which is carbon cycling. I said it's probably, this is all artificial. We're breaking up the universe into artificial chunks anyway, so it works for me. Let's call it that. But here's what we're facing. Greenhouse gas concentrations in the atmosphere going up exponentially. Climate change impacts going up exponentially. This starts from 1750 to 2000, by the way. So this is just a 250 year span of relatively recent history. Ocean impacts from ecosystem change, coastal zone structure change, and biogeochemistry changing exponentially. Terrestrial impacts from loss of tropical rainforests, the amount of domesticated land expanding, which is just directly related, and loss of global biodiversity changing dramatically. And if we look at the human drivers, we see that economic growth our prosperity we're taking that from the landscape. Remember, everything's connected. Ecosystem services are providing these things. The reason we are seeing in the most prosperous humanity in the history of our species is because we're doing this. Now, some of this I'm going to talk about a little bit tomorrow, but very briefly. You'll have a little. So I appreciate this opportunity to get this off my chest today, because I'm going to skim through this tomorrow. We just don't have time. Water resources and ag development really are dramatically altering the way we produce and expanding our production capacity to meet the demands of that increasing population. This is not bad news. This is all correlated, positive, but these are positive trends that have consequences. Prosperity consumption, the number of McDonald's restaurants. Think about that. We have dramatically altered the way we eat, the way we interact. We are, in this country, my generation, some of us in here, are old enough to remember when prosperity, the level of prosperity we all have today, where cell phones are ubiquitous, is unimaginable. How many of you had party lines growing up? Right? You guys know what a party line is? Oh, you know what a party is.
Two longs and a short.
Two longs and a short, yeah. And if you hear that click on the other line, don't say anything about your neighbor. That's usually what it meant. So the fact is, our technology is changing so rapidly, and this is a global technology too. If I can find my phone again in my pocket. This global technology, the fastest two countries were. The two countries with the fastest growth in this technology are China and Africa. It's amazing to see the rate of adoption. Of course, this is all the old news now. This was sort of a novel shtick that I did 4 years ago. Everybody gets this now. That's also how fast things are changing. We have this sort of cultural adoption of knowledge and of understanding of systems that shifts very fast too. And that's dangerous when we start talking about memes. We heard a discussion about that this morning too. We start talking about sort of wrong stories taking a life on a life of their own. Stories about fish health or aquaculture impacts on the environment, or pick your agricultural production system and somebody decides they're going to tell us this is good or bad. Because our global connectivity means that the information comes fast and we don't filter where the information comes from. So this lady with a computer sciences degree at North Carolina State University decides she's a food expert. Well, really, she's an internet expert. She knows how to make a web page. And she becomes a food expert so she can sell a book. And so she's selling a book, making a lot of money, telling people what they should and shouldn't eat. And she doesn't know beans about beans. She does not know what she's talking about. I'm not making that that's not an opinionated position. I'm an academic investor, or an academic instructor. I can evaluate knowledge based upon content, and I would give her an F for this document. It is absolutely factually incorrect, and yet this is the authority that people turn to in order to decide how to feed their kids, and it's driving decisions across our economic sphere. Burger King is making decisions based upon this knucklehead. She's probably a wonderfully nice lady. She's just. And I have to tell you that many of the people I deal with in the conservation organizations are so well intended. They're so nice, and they so want to change the world. They just don't know how to read a scientific article or a book on a subject matter that goes beyond ideology. And it's dangerous for us. We have to be better than that. If we're not better than that, we are at their mercy. So this is why we're proposing, and this is why we developed with the National Pork Board and others, this process for continuous improvement in our system, so that we have a framework to communicate to people what we're doing. When I say we, I'm talking about agriculture as a collective. What the agricultural community is doing with regards to continuous improvement. And now this is not just limited to environmental sustainability. This is across every domain of our enterprises. And frankly, most successful organizations do something like this already. Anyway, this is how you get better. This is the process of understanding how we get better. But this framework has an explicit outward-facing element to it, communicating to others. So defining sustainability for the enterprise, defining key performance indicators, selecting the metrics for those. We're going to go through this part tomorrow. Benchmarking those, set goals, and Thursday, actually, hopefully by the end of Thursday, we, as a community, the producers, the participants in the workshop will have checked the box for element 1. Benchmarking those key performance indicators, setting goals, developing strategies to meet those goals, implementing the strategies, measuring, assessing, and reporting the results, and adapting to improve outcomes. All of this has to be done transparently, outwardly facing, communicating this to the public so that you have some countermeasure to this. You have to have a and it has to be, I mean, we, agricultural producers community, have an extra burden of evidence above this. Because one misstatement or one untruth undermines everybody's credibility in the sector. Everybody's credibility in the sector. Whereas one person can shout untruths all day long, and that's just one person, and the entire advocacy sector is not undermined by that. Do you see the challenge? So we get it wrong once. We say that the consequences can be fairly dramatic to the industry in terms of loss of credibility. Credibility is awfully hard to regain. And so we have to have a process of transparency to ensure that we filter ourselves to make sure that our message is factual, science-based, outcomes-driven, etc. So those are some of the challenges we have. Now, one of the opportunities we have, though, is to make sure that in this process that we get to define the goals. That they, whoever they are, in an organization, don't define all the goals. Now, for legitimacy purposes, it's important that aspirational and strategic goals be defined with a multi-stakeholder collaborative so that you have the legitimacy of all the folks who care, stakeholders or interested and affected parties. All those interested and affected parties should have a say in what matters in terms of what your industry, what your sector does. If it's disease transmission to wild stock, if it's nutrient enrichment and eutrophication in rivers, if it's water diversion, it's in every sector's best interest to have the appropriate people in the room to determine what the appropriate goals are at the aspirational and strategic level. Aspirational goals are on the horizon. They are big, directionally correct. That is to say, if you make your decisions based upon that sort of framing of a goal, that ideal, you'll make a better decision. They're directionally correct, but they rarely are not numeric, and they generally don't have timelines. Greenhouse gas neutral, that's an aspirational goal. Zero waste, that's an aspirational goal. Nutrient recapture, those are aspirational goals. Strategic goals are numeric, time-based goals that we agree to. Reducing nutrient loss by 10% in 5 years as a sector or as an enterprise. The dashed line, though, are the management goals, and the dashed line is the purview of the enterprise or the sector or the organization that's involved in the process. It's not the multi-stakeholder initiative's purview. The importance of this dashed line, really, this came out of the work group we did with we engaged with the National Pork Board, and there are folks who are trying to struggle with how to deal with other organizations telling pork producers how to pork produce, making the rules for them. Clearly, we have common impacts and outcomes we care about. If we can achieve those outcomes, as long as the way we achieve them meets our higher goals of humane treatment of the animals and is legal and is equitable and doesn't violate the law, etc., the way we do that belongs to the producer. So no one gets to tell farmers how to farm using this framework. And that's an important distinction, because I can tell you that most certification protocols in the United States, and especially in Europe, are really prescriptive protocols telling people how to farm. Whatever it is you farm. Because somebody thinks they know how to do it better, or that this is right and that is wrong. And what that does is it moves us away from outcomes-based processes. And that is dangerous, because when you do that, you end up with ideological processes that don't make things better. Now, we'll talk a little bit more tomorrow about, if you're going to be in the workshop, about certification versus continuous improvement. I'm advocating a continuous improvement process. And NIAA has engaged with me to facilitate the roundtable for sustainable aquaculture for continuous improvement processes, not certification. I personally think certification is simply a way to make certifying organizations wealthy. I do not think that certification makes things better, by and large. And I think we have evidence in the fair trade assessment of fair trade and other big global certification protocols that show they don't achieve the outcomes they set out to achieve, because they become bureaucratic transactions that have costs and the costs drive down any value that they might have achieved otherwise. Now, that's not true everywhere. The fact is, it's a big world, and there are a lot of complex issues. But by and large, I do not believe certification protocols are good. If we have something we care about, a metric, a key performance indicator metric, and it could be feed efficiency, it could be any number of things. We want to improve this, and I'll go again tomorrow more in depth. We want to improve this over time, and we benchmark it, and we track our improvement over time. The certification protocol just sets a standard. Now, that standard might be, bronze, silver, and gold, or it might change over time, but that's it. Not good enough. That's the minimum accepted performance level, and that doesn't make things better. Continuous improvement approaches make things better. Site certifications don't. So what does continuous improvement look like? If we take a look at soybeans as an example, and soybeans is a major feed product for you folks, and the soybean industry is actually engaging in developing their own standard for U.S. soybeans, so that their own process to assert their sustainability. If we take a look at soil erosion for soybeans, this is an actual representation of the distribution of erosion of soil from low erosion to high erosion in probability across the landscape. So most of our soil erosion in the landscape is pretty low. The average is right about here. From 2010, national average was 0.131 tons per bushel. And the number's probably wrong. It's a modeled number, but it's the best we got. But it's so that we have that number. Well, we know that if we want to reduce erosion, these farmers aren't the problem. And they're generally the ones who are already using cover crops and low-till conservation tillers. The problems are usually the high slope, highly erodible soils, so the farmers are using legacy equipment, and they're usually, frankly, operating on the margin anyway. That's why they can't buy new equipment. So how do you move them here? Well, that's a technological and an extension policy challenge. But if you do move them, you move the curve by addressing them. You change the statistics for everybody. So the United States Soybean Export Council has adopted a goal of reducing soil erosion 25% across all soybean production landscapes in the United States by 2025. That's their goal, to move the curve. World Wildlife Fund says, well, they don't want that. They want farm level certification. They want to be able to go into every farm and see every farmer, what every farmer's doing. And they want to have, maybe there are 400,000 soybean farmers in the United States. Think about that. Think of the process just doesn't make any sense to me. So, how much time do I have, by the way?
A couple of minutes left.
All right, so I just want to stop with explaining what a multi-stakeholder initiative should look like, because this is where I hope the National Roundtable for Sustainable Aquaculture goes. This is what I hope it becomes. Field and Market is the Alliance for Sustainable Agriculture. It's a multi-stakeholder initiative for row crops in the United States. I'm on the board of directors. I've been working with them for 9 years now. We just had our board meeting last week in D.C. This is half the membership of Field and Market, half. We have over 85 members now, representing everyone just about every sector in the supply chain, conservation organizations, as well as biotech companies. And it is not an easy discussion to sit in a room with these folks and discuss these issues. But I think we saw this morning from, what was the first speaker's name? Jay, from Jay. I think we saw this morning from Jay's video what happens when you just put people in a room and ask them to discuss things. The process of engaging to have a dialogue to make things better isn't about just getting all the parties in a room and discussing things. APHIS, USDA APHIS organized a workshop on Thursday and Friday 2 weeks ago in North Carolina with Secretary Vilsack called the Coexistence Workshop. I'm on the AC21 from Secretary Vilsack. We a committee to evaluate how we coexist with genetically modified versus non-genetically modified crops. We sat in a room for 2 days. We worked for about 2 years to come up with a policy for coexistence. The USDA put everyone in a room to talk about that, and they had everyone from Whole Foods buyers to biotech companies and organic producers and conventional farmers and everyone in between. And it was a disaster, in my opinion. because there was no facilitation. It was just posturing. Everyone just stood up and postured. And all that does is polarize. You can only grow sustainably if you grow organically and GM-free is one posture. Well, you can't feed the world with organic. That's another posture. So, and there was no dialogue. There was just monologue. So that's what we have to avoid in this process. So as we work through how we develop this notion of dealing with the changing climate, changing environment, changing policies, changing politics, changing economics, changing demographics, changing population, changing everything, changing technology, we have to understand that the processes we used to use won't work. The processes we need to use next are going to be integrated, they're going to be transformative, just like we saw with Mark's technology and presentation on diagnostics. Everybody's going to know everything. Transparency is no longer an option, it's mandatory, because everyone's going to know anyway. There is no way you can keep a secret very long on anything anymore, especially in any production sector. So the process is, I'm optimistic about it. I see this as a very positive thing. Field to market is moving forward. We have actually been very successful in developing key performance indicators for production agriculture and in benchmarking those. And I'll be happy to talk with you about those later.